Hey guys, tonight we step onto a creaking Viking longship, the kind of vessel that carried both terror and trade across half of Europe. The salty air nips at your skin, the wood beneath your feet groans like an old man, and you instantly realize this is not going to be a comfortable cruise. The horizon is just a smear of grey where sea and sky blur together, and somewhere far ahead lies either fortune or a very watery grave. You probably won't survive this, just saying. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where and when you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The ship around you is long and narrow, like some sleek beast carved out of oak, stretching nearly 80 feet in length. 30 pairs of oars jut from its sides, resting on the lap of weathered men with calloused hands. Above your head, a single mast rises proudly, its square sail furled for now, waiting for the right wind. The carved dragon head on the prow glares into the dawn, a warning to the spirits of the sea and any human foolish enough to block your path. You stand on deck, a little unsteady, trying to balance while the waves slap against the hull. The air smells of salt tar and sweat, an oddly briny cocktail. Around you, the crew is already busy. Some men knot ropes, others check their weapons, and a few mutter short prayers to Odin or Njord under their breath. These are not prayers like you'd hear in a quiet chapel. They sound more like bargaining pleas mixed with threats. Protect me, and I'll offer you an ox. Ignore me, and I'll curse you. One thing you notice right away: sleep is not exactly private here. You woke this morning on a bedroll spread across planks squeezed between two snoring giants. Vikings didn't bother much with privacy. Your cloak is both blanket and mattress, and if you're lucky, it keeps out at least half the morning chill. A few of the crew already rise, stamping their feet against the cold and rubbing hands that look like leather from years of rowing. The rhythm of the ship is clear. When the sun rises, so do you. And when the captain, or steersman as they call him, gives the word, you grab your oar and start pulling. No excuses. Viking longships weren't built for comfort, they were built for speed, stealth, and surprise. Historians still argue whether the average longship could hit 10 knots with sail and oars combined, but one thing's certain: when this many burly men row in unison, the boat practically flies across the water. The soundscape is hypnotic: creak, splash, grunt, creak, splash, grunt. And of course the occasional curse when someone smashes a knuckle against the gunwale. Your arms already ache just from watching, but you know soon enough you'll be gripping one of those heavy oars. Each one is nearly 15 feet long, thicker than your wrist, and designed to move not just water but destiny. As the ship readies to leave harbour, the mood shifts, the chatter quiets. Men squint at the horizon. You can feel the anticipation in your bones. It's that strange blend of dread and thrill before any great journey. Someone adjusts the prow's dragon head, making sure it sits straight, as if the carved beast itself will ward off trouble. A boy barely old enough to shave darts between the older men, carrying a bucket of pitch to smear into cracks on the deck. Everyone has a role here, from the greybeard navigator to the youngest deckhand. And then comes the call, row. At once the oars dip into the sea. Water splashes upward, dampening your boots. You join in awkward at first, but soon your movements match those around you. The boat surges forward with surprising smoothness. The morning sun hits the sailcloth, though it remains tied, and you know once the wind fills it, the speed will double. The shore slides away behind you, green fields dotted with sheep, low houses with thatched roofs, and the smoke of hearth fires spiraling into the sky. A few villagers wave, though whether it's farewell or Good riddance, you're not sure. Children cheer, dogs bark, and somewhere on the beach a woman lifts a hand, perhaps to her husband, perhaps to the gods. Out on open water you feel the full expanse of the sea. It stretches endlessly, shimmering under the pale sun. The ship rises and dips as if breathing. A gull circles overhead, crying sharply, then dives toward the waves. The air grows colder the farther you row. And just when you think you're getting the hang of this, a burly warrior beside you chuckles. "Don't get too cozy," he says, in a tone both mocking and oddly friendly. "By tonight your hands will blister like a priest at a feast." You laugh nervously, but he isn't wrong. Already the wood rubs against your palms, rough and unyielding. It's strange to think that this ship, this floating plank of timber and tar, is both a weapon and a home. By the end of this voyage you'll have rowed, fought, eaten, slept, maybe even bled on its deck. And if the gods favor you, you'll also return alive. For now, though, dawn stretches wide across the horizon, and your longship surges forward with 30 voices groaning in rhythm, 30 oars biting the sea, and a carved dragon prow leading you into whatever lies ahead. By mid-morning the routine has set in. You grip your oar, back bent, shoulders aching in that steady grind that feels endless, but also strangely hypnotic. The longship slices through the waves like a blade water, shearing away from its narrow hull. Your breathing falls into rhythm with the others' inhale, when the oar dips, exhale, when it pulls back, and before long you realize this is the heartbeat of Viking life. Rowing isn't optional, it's survival. Without it, you drift uselessly, prey for storms or enemies. Now, the mast and sail help when the wind cooperates, but let's be honest, the wind doesn't always feel like cooperating, so most days you're the engine. And it's not just about brute strength, though. There's plenty of that. It's about teamwork. 30 oars crashing out of sync would rip the boat apart. You need unity. So you row in silence, listening for the rhythm caller, a man who beats time by slapping a shield or chanting a steady verse. The chant this morning is simple, pull, brothers, pull. Pull, sons of Odin. Over and over his voice rasps until it blurs into the waves themselves. It's a primitive version of Spotify, except you can't skip the track. By now, your shoulders burn. Your hands have already sprouted tender blisters that sting with every pull. And yet you can't stop. To stop rowing is to break the rhythm, to risk anger from the man next to you, and trust me, Viking patience doesn't stretch far. You sneak a glance around. The crew is a patchwork of humanity. Some men are old bearded veterans with scars deep enough to hold raindrops. Others are practically boys' eyes wide, but determined, eager to prove themselves. Most wear simple tunics under cloaks, though a few richer warriors flash bits of mail or bronze, and all of them have that look, equal parts exhaustion and fierce determination. Your stomach growls, but food won't come until the next break. Meals on a long ship are, let's call them, minimalistic. A lump of bread so hard it could double as a weapon dried fish, tough as leather, maybe a smear of butter if you're lucky. For drink, watered down ale, safer than raw seawater, though arguably not tastier. Historical records note that Viking crews could drink astonishing amounts of ale, but let's be real on a ship, too much ale just means trouble over the side. Now here's a quirky tidbit. Archaeologists once found preserved Viking bread made from bark mixed with grains. Yes, bark. Imagine chewing on a soggy tree and you get the idea. You can almost hear your dentist weeping. Yet it kept bellies from aching, and in Viking logic, that was good enough. The ship rolls gently, and you notice one poor man turning a shade of green. Seasickness was as real then as now, and sadly, no one packed Dramamine in the year 900. Instead, you get mocked. A burly warrior pats the man's back with false sympathy, saying, Better out than in. Feed the sea spirits and maybe they'll smile on us. He's joking, but not entirely. Some Vikings believed that spilling offerings into the sea could appease Njord, the god of seafaring. Whether vomit counted as an offering, historians still argue whether it did. Around noon, the steersman shouts and the sail finally unfurls. The square cloth billows as it catches a friendly wind painted with bright red stripes. Suddenly the rowing eases and relief floods through your arms. The boat surges forward under wind power, faster and smoother than before. The men cheer, leaning back, shaking the burn from their muscles. For a few blessed hours the sail does the work. With your oar resting, you finally take a breath and just look. The sea spreads endless in all directions, glittering under the pale sun. A school of fish breaks the surface scales, flashing silver before vanishing again. Far off, a whale exhales, sending a plume of mist into the air. You catch the faint, almost sweet smell of tar and seaweed mixed in the breeze. This is the strange paradox of life at sea, misery laced with awe. One moment you're cursing your blisters, the next you're marveling at a whale, the next you're laughing at some crude joke shouted from the other side of the ship. It's exhausting, but it's alive. Your thoughts drift to the journey itself. Where are you headed? Maybe a raid on a fat monastery along the English coast, maybe a trading venture to the market to the east, maybe just a test run to remind the gods you still exist. That's the thing, longship voyages could lead anywhere. One week you're rowing past icy fjords, the next you're burning a village, the next you're haggling for spices in Constantinople. This single plank of wood under your feet could carry you across half the known world. The men stretch chatter, some nap under cloaks. A few sharpen blades with slow, practiced motions, the scrape of stone against metal blending with the groan of timbers. There's a calm to it, but always the hum of tension underneath, because the sea is fickle, and danger can appear faster than you can draw a sword. For now, though, you let the wind carry you. You lean against the side, feeling the spray against your cheek. You laugh at a joke about Thor's hammer being nothing compared to a wife's frying pan. You close your eyes for a moment, lulled by the steady roll of the waves. And in this fleeting peace you realize something. This is what binds these men. Not the promise of treasure, not even the glory of battle, but this, the shared rhythm, the shared hardship, the shared joke about frying pans. In a world where survival is never guaranteed, these small bonds are everything. The calm doesn't last. It never does. By late afternoon, clouds roll in, bruised and heavy, swallowing the horizon in grey. The waves grow restless, rocking the longship with a warning sway. You tighten your grip on the edge of the bench, because here comes the test of any Viking crew, the sea's bad mood. The steersman bellows orders, his voice roar against the rising wind. The sail is hauled down, quickly bundled into a rough heap. You and the others grab the oars again, every muscle groaning in protest. The sea is no longer your highway, it's your enemy, and the only way to keep the ship steady is to row, row, row. Rain spits sharp as needles against your face. Salt spray blinds your eyes. Each stroke of the oar feels heavier than the last, as if the sea itself is clawing at the blade, trying to drag it under. Men shout to each other, but most of their words are lost to the roar of waves slamming against wood. The ship creaks like a living creature in pain, timbers flexing under the strain. And yet somehow you keep rhythm. Fear sharpens focus. You row harder, faster, lungs burning, because if you slack now, you'll throw the crew off balance. And imbalance means capsizing. That's not exactly the bedtime story ending you were hoping for. Historical fact-time Viking longships were designed for exactly this chaos. Their shallow keels allowed them to skim over waves that would swamp deeper vessels. That flexible, clinker-built hull, the overlapping planks riveted with iron, wasn't fragile. It bent and flexed like a reed in the wind-absorbing shock that would snap stiffer ships apart. In a way, the Longship was like a giant wooden surfboard riding the sea instead of resisting it. Still, knowledge doesn't ease the nausea in your stomach. You glance at the steersman who's wrestling the great steering oar, fixed to the stern. The man is half mad, laughing between curses as spray drenches him from head to toe. Some swear the steering oar was more important than any sword on the ship, and right now you believe it. The storm intensifies. Lightning forks overhead, casting eerie light across the crew's faces, wide eyes, clenched teeth, hair plastered to their foreheads. For one heartbeat, everything looks like a scene carved onto a runestone, raw human determination against a furious sky. Then thunder cracks so loud it rattles your chest. Someone shouts a prayer, maybe to Thor, maybe to Njord, maybe to anyone listening. Another man laughs, yelling that Odin must be shaking his mead horn and spilling it across the sea. That's the Viking way joke, even in the jaws of death. Here's your quirky tidbit. There are stories of Vikings carrying ravens aboard longships. In foul weather or lost at sea, they'd release the bird. If it circled and returned, land was nowhere nearby. But if it flew off with purpose, the crew would steer in that direction, trusting the raven to find shore. Imagine relying on a bird's instincts to guide your life beats, your GPS app, but not by much. You row until your arms feel like lead, until your vision blurs with sweat and seawater. At one point, the ship tips so steeply you're sure it will capsize, but then it rights itself, groaning like an old warrior who refuses to fall. The oar in your hands feels like part of your own body now, an extension of bone and sinew. There's no you and the sea anymore, only struggle. And then, as quickly as it rose, the storm begins to ease. The rain thins to drizzle. The sky lightens, bruises of cloud slowly parting. The sea, though still restless, loses some of its bite. You're trembling, soaked through, exhausted to the marrow, but alive. The crew erupts into ragged cheers, voices hoarse yet triumphant. Surviving the storm feels like surviving Ragnarok itself. The steersman, grinning through his dripping beard, yells, "Odin tests us and we are still standing." A few men pound their chests in agreement, while others collapse against their benches, too tired to do anything but breathe. You take a moment leaning on your oar to look out across the calming water. The air smells sharp and clean, washed of salt and sweat. The clouds split just enough for a sliver of sunlight to spill through, glinting off the damp planks. The storm has passed, but it leaves behind a quiet that feels sacred. And in that stillness you realize the truth of seafaring danger is constant survival, uncertain. Historians still argue whether the Vikings truly believed their deaths at sea guaranteed a place in Valhalla, but right now you understand why that belief mattered. Facing down the storm with nothing but wood muscle and stubborn will that takes faith in something beyond yourself. The crew settles some muttering thanks to the gods, others wringing water from their cloaks. You, for your part, are simply grateful your stomach hasn't joined the offerings to the sea. A shaky laugh escapes you, the kind of laugh that comes when fear finally drains away. And as the longship steadies, you can't help thinking, congratulations, you've survived your first Viking storm. Though let's be real, you probably won't survive the next one. Morning comes on pale and misty. Your arms ache from the storm's punishment, your palms blistered raw against the oar. Yet the sea is calm now, smooth as polished glass, and the longship glides forward with eerie quiet. For a moment, you almost forget the chaos of last night, until your stomach growls. Loudly, food. You suddenly remember that humans can't row forever on saltwater fumes and bravado. Fortunately, you're not the only one. Around you, men dig into leather sacks and small wooden boxes stowed beneath their benches. Dried fish, smoked pork, hard cheese and flat dense bread appear like treasures. Someone cracks open a small cask of ale, the smell yeasty and sour, but still far better than plain seawater. You join the ritual, tugging at a strip of dried cod. It's tough like chewing on salted rope, but it keeps your jaw busy and your stomach less mutinous. Bread is harder still, baked dense to last the journey. You gnaw at it with a stubbornness the gods themselves would admire. You chase it with a gulp of ale, which is warm and flat, but at least it doesn't taste like brine. Historical fact, Vikings did not live off fresh fish alone at sea. Fresh catches were rare in open water because rowing and steering left little time for casting nets. Instead, they packed dried and smoked provisions and barrels of ale or mead because fresh water spoiled quickly in wooden casks. Alcohol was safer in small doses than risking foul water. As you eat, laughter rises from one side of the ship. One of the younger men holds up a lump of butter now slick with seawater from the storm. He declares it the sea's gift, though, judging by its smell, the gods would politely decline. The crew laughs, some too hungry to care and dipping bread anyway. You pass on the offer. Butter-flavoured barnacles aren't your thing. Here's your quirky tidbit. There are medieval accounts suggesting that some Viking sailors fermented fish guts into a paste both for food and for barter. Historians still argue whether that's exaggerated slander from their enemies or an actual delicacy. Either way, you're secretly glad your menu today is just dried cod. After eating, the crew settles back into their tasks. A few men patch a sail, torn in the storm. Others caulk seams between planks with tar and animal hair. You're given the humble but important job of bailing water with a wooden scoop. The longship has no bilge pump, so every drop that sloshes aboard must be thrown overboard by hand. You bail scoop after scoop, thinking this must be the Viking equivalent of doing the dishes. The steersman walks the deck, his sharp eyes checking every detail. He notices your sluggish bailing and smirks. Keep the ship afloat, or we'll tell the skalds you drowned us all with laziness. You nod quickly and scoop faster because the last thing you need is to become a punchline in some saga. As the morning wears on, a smell begins to creep over the ship. It's ripe. Sweat, fish oil, damp wool, tar, and unwashed feet blend into a perfume strong enough to curl your nose hairs. You shift on your bench, realizing that personal hygiene isn't exactly top priority at sea. Baths? Forget it. You'll settle for splashing your face with seawater when the crew isn't watching. Of course, there's the other matter, no toilets. The latrine is simply leaning over the railing, hanging on for dear life. You're grateful when someone discreetly explains the process before you embarrass yourself in front of 30 hardened warriors. Still, let's be honest, it's not exactly the spa day you signed up for. Despite discomforts, the rhythm of life at sea settles in. Row bail, eat, row nap, in snatches, then row again. The horizon stretches endlessly, broken only by seabirds wheeling overhead. Some men pass time carving runes into their oar handles. Others hum songs that sound halfway between lullabies and battle chants. One older warrior leans toward you, muttering that seabirds are good luck except gulls, which he insists carry the souls of drowned sailors. He says this with a completely straight face, then chuckles when you glance nervously at a gull circling overhead. Joke number 2 for today. If that bird follows us long enough, maybe it'll pay its share of the rowing. Your belly is full, your arms sore, and your senses dulled by the endless sway of sea. As you slump on your bench, eyes heavy, you realize the truth. Life aboard a Viking longship isn't just about glory and raids. It's about endurance, weathering the boredom, the smells, the blisters, and the monotony. Historians still argue whether Viking sailors actually romanticized this grind or simply endured it for the promise of loot and fame at the end. Whatever the case, right now you'd trade all the sagas of Valhalla for a pillow and a hot meal. You close your eyes, lulled by the steady slap of water against the hull. For just a moment you almost drift off, imagining yourself not as a weary rower, but as one of those heroes from the old stories. The sea, however, doesn't allow much sleep, and a shout from the lookout snaps you back to reality. Land, land ahead. Your heart skips. Food, discomfort, boredom, they all vanish under the thrill of that single word. The longship surges with renewed energy, every man straightening every oar, striking the water with purpose. Land means rest, and maybe, just maybe, a real meal. Land. The word still buzzes in your ears like mead on an empty stomach. Every man on the longship sits taller, his oar suddenly lighter. You crane your neck, squinting at the horizon until there it is. A smear of green faint against the grey water. After days of nothing but sea, it looks like paradise. The steersman orders the sail raised, canvas unfurls with a groan, and the ship catches the morning wind gliding forward faster than weary arms ever could. Rowers stow their oars, rubbing blistered palms, and a collective sigh of relief spreads through the crew. Your arms are grateful too, though you still feel like they might vibrate off your body. The coastline sharpens as you near it. Forests rise like walls of green with mountains hazy in the distance. A river mouth yawns open, promising fresh water, and if the gods are merciful, something edible that isn't dried fish leather. The longship slides into the calmer waters of the estuary, its shallow hull perfect for this trick. You marvel again at the design, clinker-built planks overlapping, like fish scales, light enough for speed yet sturdy enough to face storms. Historical fact. Viking longships were engineering marvels for their time. Their shallow draft allowed them to sail not only the open sea but also rivers as narrow as creeks. This is how raiders could appear suddenly far inland in towns that thought themselves safe. Their ships were as much a weapon as their swords. As the ship glides toward shore, men begin to chatter about what awaits. Some joke about roasted boar and barrels of ale waiting just for them. Others mention Silverland or willing companions. You're not sure whether to laugh along or worry about the fact that half of these men look far too excited at the thought of looting. Quirky tidbit Time One Sagas claims that some Vikings carried ravens on board. When close to land, they'd release the birds, and if the raven flew straight ahead, instead of circling, it meant shore was near. No ravens on this trip, you suppose the lookout's eyesight will have to do. The crew drops anchor just offshore, the longship rocking gently. A smaller boat is lowered and men leap in oars, flashing as they row toward the beach. You're shoved along with them, clutching the side for dear life. The surf foams as the boat crunches onto wet sand. For the first time in days, your boots sink into solid ground. You could kiss it, though that would earn you endless mockery. The first order of business, fresh water. A stream burbles not far off, and the men rush to fill skins, drink deeply, and splash their faces. You copy them, the icy water, shocking your lips, your throat, your entire body awake. For a second you think you might actually cry from happiness. No, you don't, because you'd never live it down. The second order of business food. Hunters and gatherers split off, some checking rabbit snares, others foraging berries. A few unlucky souls, you among them, are handed spears and told to fish in the shallows. You jab, clumsily missing again and again, until finally you pin one silvery fish against a rock. The cheer that rises is more sarcastic than celebratory, but hey, food is food. As fires are lit and cooking begins, smoke and savory smells swirl into the air. Roasting fish, sizzling rabbit and charred flatbread. from a simple, griddled stone. Your mouth waters, your stomach growls, and when a portion finally comes your way, you devour it like a starved wolf. The fish is smoky, flaky, and so much better than the leathery cod you've chewed at sea. Historians still argue whether Viking raiding parties lived entirely off stolen supplies or whether they actually hunted and foraged as they travelled. What's clear is that adaptability was key. Raid when possible, forage when necessary, starve when unlucky. You're learning firsthand that glory and hunger often go hand in hand. After the meal you wander back toward the beach. The Longship sits proud in the shallows, its dragon-headed prow gleaming in the fading light. The crew lounges, some dozing, some sharpening weapons, others swapping tall tales of past raids. One grey-bearded man brags that he once fought off 5 Saxons single-handed. Judging by his missing teeth, you suspect they got at least one good hit in. It's here in the lull of evening that the skald begins to sing. His voice is low and gravelly, carrying over the crackle of fire. He chants of Odin's wisdom, Thor's hammer, and long voyages across endless seas. The men hum along, some raising cups of ale, others pounding rhythms on their shields. You sit quietly, listening, lulled by the cadence. The words may be half lost to you, but the emotion isn't pride, longing, a hunger for immortality in story, if not in life. For a moment you feel like part of something bigger, a crew, bound not just by oars and blisters, but by shared songs, shared hunger, shared dreams. And then, just as you're starting to relax, someone nudges you with a grin, enjoying the peace. Good. Tomorrow we raid. You nearly choke on your last sip of ale. Raid. You thought this was a field trip with extra rowing, but no, the real Viking experience is only just beginning. Morning arrives earlier than you'd like, though it's hard to say whether you ever truly slept. The ground was lumpy, the night chills sank into your bones, and someone snored like Thor's hammer beating a drum. When you stumble upright, the camp is already buzzing, weapons are being strapped, shields lifted, and boats prepped for the short hop inland. Today is not about fish or berries. Today is about silver glory, and probably a few bruises for you personally. The Longship noses upriver with steady strokes of the oars. Mist curls low across the water, muffling sound and turning the crew into shadowy figures. You clutch your borrowed spear like it's a comfort blanket. The steersman murmurs that a monastery lies further inland, a soft target rich in gold books and food. Monks aren't exactly renowned for their swordplay. Historical fact, monasteries really were prime Viking targets. They housed treasure-kept livestock and usually had very little defense. Lindisfarne in 793 is one of the most infamous early raids. News of that attack shocked Christendom and earned the Vikings their fearsome reputation. The ship glides past banks thick with reeds. Birds rise, startled into the dawn, their calls echoing. You're torn between awe and dread. The countryside is peaceful, too peaceful, and the idea of charging ashore with a bunch of axe-wielding lunatics makes your stomach twist. Quirky tidbit: some sources claim Vikings believed that stealing church bells brought luck, or at least made excellent metal to melt down for weapons. Can you imagine a Viking trying to row with a 2-ton bell in his lap? You wonder if any poor soul was actually stuck with that job. The mist begins to thin and the lookout points ahead. Smoke rises from a cluster of buildings, wooden walls, and one stone church whose spire cuts into the pale sky. There it is, the monastery. The crew tightens formation. Shields are lifted, axes gripped, and you're nudged into line. "Stick close," the warrior beside you says with a grin, "and try not to die." It ruins morale, comforting advice. The Longship crunches into the shallows and the Vikings splash ashore with frightening speed. You follow boots, sucking into mudheart hammering in your ears. The monks have barely noticed before the first shouts ring out. Some flee toward the church clutching crosses and books. Others attempt to bar doors, but the Vikings are already upon them, axes hacking through wood like it's driftwood. You stumble after the warriors, your spear more of a walking stick than a weapon. Inside the monastery grounds, chaos explodes. Silver candlesticks are snatched, food stores raided, and manuscripts tossed aside like kindling. You cringe as one burly raider hoists a crate of wine over his shoulder with glee. Historians still argue whether Vikings truly despised Christianity or simply targeted churches because they were wealthy and easy prey. Some accounts suggest deliberate desecration, while others show a more practical looter's mindset. You're leaning toward practical. These men look more interested in cheese wheels than theology. And then it happens, you're shoved a sack and told to make yourself useful. Your hands tremble as you scoop up whatever you find: cups, small silver crosses, even a carved wooden box whose purpose you can't guess. You try not to meet the eyes of terrified monks huddling in corners. One mutters something under his breath, probably a prayer, but you can't help feeling it might be a curse. A sudden clang jolts you. A local villager, somehow armed with a pitchfork, charges at the raiders. He looks like he means business until a shield bash sends him sprawling. He groans and scrambles away wisely, deciding the odds aren't in his favor. You swallow hard, realizing this could easily have been you had the roles been reversed. Loot secured the Vikings' move with practiced efficiency. Fires lick at the monastery roof, smoke curling skyward. The raiders regroup, shouting, laughing, slapping each other's backs. For them this is success. For you it feels like an unsettling glimpse into how wealth was made one terrified monk at a time. The retreat is as swift as the attack. Back to the longship, chests and sacks heaped into the hold. The prow swings downstream again, the ship gliding away before locals can gather reinforcements. Behind you, smoke rises like a signal flare. Ahead, the river winds silently, carrying you back toward the sea. On board, the mood is jubilant. Men count loot, share wine, even juggle silver goblets, as if this is some tavern game. You're offered a swig of pilfered mead, and though it tastes sweet and strong, your stomach still feels like it's made of stone. One warrior claps you back so hard you nearly tumble overboard. "You did well, little monk slayer," he laughs, despite the fact you didn't slay anyone. Still you accept the praise. Maybe surviving without crying counts as a small victory. As evening falls, the ship drifts into a sheltered cove. Fires are lit again, food roasted, and the spoils laid out for admiration. The skald composes a new verse on the spot, singing of silver, gleaming brighter than stars, of brave warriors, of terrified monks fleeing like geese. The men roar with laughter. You lie back, staring up at the stars. The night is calm, the fire crackles, and yet your mind buzzes. You've survived your first raid, stumbled through fear, and somehow remain intact. Whether you feel proud or just relieved is another matter entirely. Tomorrow, though, the journey will continue. And from the way the warriors are talking, monasteries aren't the only targets on their horizon. By morning, the loot has been divided, or at least loudly argued over, until everyone pretends to be satisfied. Gold, silver, and a staggering amount of cheese are packed into storage, and the long ship noses back toward open sea. You're not sure whether you're exhilarated or just seasick again, but either way, there's no time to rest, because today isn't about raiding. Today is about trade. The Vikings weren't just axe-swinging marauders, no matter what television loves to show. They were also clever traders navigating rivers and seas to swap furs, amber and slaves for silk, spices and fine weapons. Ports from Dublin to Constantinople buzzed with their commerce. And lucky you're about to get a crash course in Viking marketplace etiquette, which mostly boils down to haggle aggressively and never let them see fear. The Longship glides into a bustling coastal settlement, more a trading hub than a war camp. Colourful tents are pitched along the waterfront, smoke curls from cooking fires, and the din of dozens of languages mingles with the cry of gulls. You can smell everything roasted fish tar from the ships and something suspiciously like fermented shark. Quirky tidbit Vikings had a trade item called walrus ivory, harvested from the Arctic. It was highly prized for luxury carvings. So yes, at some point someone convinced a merchant that big seahorse teeth were the next big thing. You imagine the pitch meeting must have been legendary. As you step onto the wharf, you realize this isn't just a Viking affair. Merchants from the Frankish kingdoms, the British Isles, even a few Arabic traders, all are here hawking wares and shouting prices. It's a medieval version of Wall Street, except with fewer suits and more spears. Your job apparently is to carry the loot into the market. A chest of silver is shoved into your arms and you stagger forward, the coins clinking ominously. Vikings fan out, heading for favoured stalls. One begins bartering for silk, another for iron blades, and another seems mostly interested in a keg of ale. Historians still argue whether Viking trade was driven more by necessity or luxury. Did they truly need those silks and spices, or were they indulging in status symbols? Judging by the way one warrior wraps himself in a shimmering Byzantine cloth, like a runway model, you're leaning toward luxury. You're dragged to a stall where a bearded trader offers fine steel swords. The Viking negotiator slams a silver goblet onto the counter and begins bellowing. You watch in amazement as what looks like an argument to the death turns into a handshake and grins. Apparently that's how you haggle here, scream until someone laughs. Then it's your turn. A merchant eyes you with suspicion, probably because you look like a lost tourist. You nervously offer a carved cross from the monastery. The merchant frowns, mutters something about bad omens, but then unexpectedly hands you a pouch of dried figs. Victory. You're not sure, but at least you didn't get stabbed. Nearby you hear tales of far-off lands. One trader speaks of Baghdad, where markets glitter with spices and gold. Another boasts of Constantinople, whose walls are said to be taller than any Viking ship mast. You feel a pang of wanderlust. If you weren't constantly fearing seasickness, raiding, or being stabbed, this kind of travel might actually be appealing. The Vikings regroup at a long wooden table when new purchases are admired and wine flows freely. Someone plops a jeweled belt around your waist, calling it a reward for not fainting during the monastery raid. You mutter thanks, though the belt feels like it belongs in a museum exhibit rather than on your awkward hips. As the sun dips, music begins. Drums pound, flutes trill, and dancers spin in the firelight. Merchants and Vikings alike join in creating a scene more carnival than marketplace. You're pulled into a circle, forced to clap in rhythm. Your two left feet betray you instantly, but the laughter is good-natured. Even here, amidst fierce warriors, there's joy play and a surprising amount of terrible singing. Later, when the fires burn low, you sit at the dock, watching lanterns shimmer on the water. The spoils of war have turned into goods of trade. You realize the Vikings are not just raiders, but networkers of their age, plugging into a web that stretched from Scandinavia to the Middle East. Not bad for people who still think walrus ivory is chic. As you head back to the ship, weighed down with figs fabrics and that ridiculous belt, you can't help but wonder what tomorrow will bring. Because with these people, it could be anything from a feast to a battle to a storm that swallows the sea whole. Morning mist hangs over the water, and for once there's no frantic yelling to row, no horns announcing battle, no merchants shouting prices. Instead, the Longship is anchored quietly offshore. Breakfast is a surprisingly calm affair: fish, stew, flatbread, and that same sour ale you're beginning to tolerate. The air feels almost restful, which should worry you because in Viking, life calm usually comes before chaos. Today the chieftain decides it's time for you to pull your weight, not with rowing, not with raiding, but with ship maintenance. Turns out a longship isn't just some magical woodcraft that sails forever. It needs patching, caulking, and endless tinkering. And guess who's volunteered to help? That's right, you. You're handed a lump of tar that smells like every bad campfire rolled into one. Your task: smear it into the cracks between planks to keep the sea out. Glamorous, right? As you crouch awkwardly, the Vikings laugh and shout helpful encouragement, like, "Don't drown us, foreigner." One even pretends to rock the boat just to see you panic. Mainstream fact. Viking longships were clinker-built, meaning their planks overlapped like fish scales. This design gave them flexibility in rough seas. It also meant constant upkeep since the overlapping edges could leak if not sealed properly. So while you're smearing tar and grumbling, you're literally participating in what kept these ships legendary. Quirky tidbit: sometimes Vikings chewed birch bark tar as a sort of chewing gum. Bits of it with tooth marks have actually been found by archaeologists. You consider popping a piece of this goo into your mouth for authenticity, but wisely decide you'd rather not poison yourself. The work continues. Next comes sail repair. The massive wool sail is lowered and spread across the deck. It's red-striped and smells faintly of smoke, as if it's absorbed centuries of fireside stories. Your job is to stitch a tier with coarse thread and a bone needle. The Viking supervising you mutters something about even grandmothers sew straighter. You can't argue. Your stitches look like a drunk spider staggered across the cloth. By midday, the chieftain inspects the ship, running a calloused hand along the hull. He grunts approval, or at least doesn't throw you overboard, which counts as approval. Then he announces what everyone has been dreading: sailing drills. The oars are lowered. You're ordered to row alongside the crew, matching their rhythm. The drummer starts a slow beat, then faster, until your arms scream and sweat drips into your eyes. It's brutal. Yet when the longship surges forward smoothly, skimming the waves with terrifying speed, you feel a strange exhilaration. This vessel, built with care and powered by sheer muscle, is alive in its own way. Historians still argue whether Viking longships were primarily tools of war or trade. Were they floating battle machines or mobile markets? Sitting here blistering your hands on an oar, you'd say both. They're adaptable, deadly, and beautiful in their own austere way. After drills, the mood shifts. A storm is spotted on the horizon. The sky darkens, the sea swells, and suddenly your maintenance lesson turns into survival training. Vikings scramble to lash down cargo, reef the sail, and secure every loose rope. You, of course, are assigned the crucial job of hold this and don't die. The storm hits with a roar. Rain lashes your face, lightning splits the sky, and the ship heaves like a wild animal. You cling to the ropes, praying you don't become shark bait. Vikings laugh in the face of thunder, shouting to Thor for strength, as if the god himself is conducting a heavy metal concert above. Miraculously, the ship endures. The overlapping planks, the tar, the stitched sail all hold true. You realize your clumsy repairs, laughable as they seemed, played a part in keeping the vessel afloat. For the first time you feel not like dead weight, but part of the crew. When the storm passes, the sea turns eerily calm. A rainbow arcs across the horizon. The Vikings nod in satisfaction, as if to say, "Another Tuesday." You slump to the deck, soaked, exhausted, but oddly proud. That night, as the stars reappear, you lie back on the planks, sore in every muscle. The ship creaks, the water laps gently, and for a fleeting moment you almost understand why these people choose this life. Adventure, danger, glory, and survival, all stitched together by wood tar and willpower. And then someone dumps a bucket of cold seawater on you just to remind you you're still the rookie here. The storm has passed, the ship creaks softly, and the sea smells sharp and clean, as if the world itself has been scrubbed. You think you've earned a quiet night's rest, but the Vikings have other plans. Dawn comes with a horn blast and the clatter of weapons. The chieftain declares it's time for combat drills. Lucky you! You're handed a shield round wooden, painted in faded blue, with an iron boss at the centre. It feels heavier than expected, and your arm already protests before the first swing. Then comes the sword, a blunt practice blade, though still plenty capable of breaking your teeth if you get careless. The warriors form a circle on the beach, eager to see how quickly the newcomer will embarrass himself. Spoiler very quickly, they start with shield walls. You're shoved into a line of burly men's shields overlapping, forming what looks like a mobile wooden fence. Locked tight, someone growls. Then another line slams into you, and suddenly you're crushed between bodies, wood and sweat. You stagger, nearly fall, but the Viking to your left hooks his arm around you, grinning. "Stand strong, little fish," he laughs. Apparently you've just earned a nickname. Mainstream fact, the shield wall or skjaldborg was a key Viking battlefield tactic. It wasn't glamorous, more like organized shoving with sharp edges, but when done right, it turned a mob into an unstoppable wedge. Standing in one now, you realize how terrifying it would be to face a wall of snarling men with axes pressed shoulder to shoulder. Next come one-on-one duels. You're matched against a warrior who clearly skipped breakfast just to have more time for flexing. He swings lazily at first, testing you while you flail like a drunken stork. Each time you miss, the crowd roars with laughter. When you finally manage to land a weak tap on his shoulder, the cheer is deafening because the warriors love underdog slapstick. Quirky tidbit Viking training sometimes included holmgang, a duel fought on a cloak spread on the ground. Step off the cloak and you lose. Sounds more like a bizarre picnic game than Mortal Kombat. You're relieved they don't roll out a blanket here. The drills shift into axe throwing. You're handed a short-handled throwing axe, edges dulled but still gleaming. The target is a wooden post decorated with a crude drawing of some unlucky enemy. You hurl your axe. It lands in the sand, about 3 feet short. The Vikings howl, falling over themselves with laughter. One kindly warrior retrieves it, pats your back and says, "Good, that would kill a mouse." Historians still argue whether every Viking was a warrior, or whether many were simply farmers who fought when necessary. Standing here, watching these men treat combat drills as both serious business and after-dinner entertainment, you suspect the truth lies somewhere between. They work hard at fighting, but they also laugh harder than most armies you've ever imagined. By midday, you're bruised, battered, and possibly missing part of your dignity. But there's no malice in it. This is their way of toughening you up. Even the warrior who flattened you in the duel offers a share of his mead. He raises a cup, grins with broken teeth, and declares, "You fight like a goat, but you live like one of us." Apparently that's high praise. The rest of the afternoon is spent in mock skirmishes. Half the crew plays defenders, half attackers. You're shoved into whichever side looks short-handed. The blows are hard enough to sting, but never fatal. Every time you trip, someone hauls you back up. Every time you wince, someone shouts encouragement. Slowly you realize the drills are less about skill and more about forging bonds. When you bleed and laugh together, you become part of the crew. As the sun sets, the training ends with a wrestling match between the two strongest men aboard. They crash into the sand like bulls, grunting and grappling, while the others shout bets and insults. You can't help but laugh when one of them slips on seaweed and faceplants, because even the fiercest warriors are still human. The evening closes around a fire on the shore. Bruised but alive, you sip ale with the others. The camaraderie feels strange, like you've stumbled into a rough but welcoming family. They tease you, but they also clap your back, pass you food, and share their scars like proud trophies. Tonight you're sore, blistered and aching everywhere. But as the stars brighten overhead and laughter echoes across the beach, you realize something. For all the chaos and violence, life on a Viking longship is about belonging. And somehow, against all odds, you're starting to belong. Morning comes early as always, with the sound of gulls screaming overhead and the smell of brine wafting across the beach. You'd like to pull the cloak over your head and pretend you're back in your own bed, but the Vikings are already stirring. Today isn't about storms or swordplay, it's about keeping the ship and yourself in one piece. Maintenance day. The longship squats on the shore like a tired dragon. Its oak planks creak softly as the tide shifts beneath it. You're handed a bucket of pitch and a brush made from stiff horsehair. Congratulations, you've been drafted into ship repair duty. Your job is to smear this tar-like goo into every crack between the hull planks, sealing the ship against leaks. Within minutes, your hands are sticky, your tunic is ruined, and your nose is burning from the fumes. Mainstream fact: Vikings coated their ships in tar and pitch, not just for waterproofing, but also to protect against rot. Without constant care, the longships would crumble after a season or two, especially given the salty sea and heavy use. Basically, it's medieval boat sunscreen. While you're grumbling and scraping, another crew member shows you how to check the ropes. They haul out bundles of hemp, twisted thick as your wrist, and you're tasked with examining each one for frays. A frayed rope at sea could mean a snapped sail or a broken anchor line. You never realized how much rope one ship could require. It feels like an endless snake pit. Quirky tidbit: Viking sailors sometimes used walrus or seal hides as extra strong rope in the far north. Imagine lashing a mast with something that still smells faintly of blubber. Lucky for you, today's batch is just regular hemp. Next up, sails. The great square sail is hauled down and spread across the sand like a giant patchwork quilt. Its heavy wool, thickly woven, dyed a faded red. You and several others squat around it with bone needles and coarse thread patching worn spots and reinforcing seams. The wool pricks your fingers, leaving tiny red dots. You mutter that this feels more like Grandma's sewing circle than warrior training. One Viking nods sagely and replies, "Yes, but Grandma's sail keeps us alive." Point taken. Historians still argue whether Viking sails were always brightly dyed, or if plain undyed wool was more common. Some say red sails were a display of wealth, while others insist most were dull grey or brown. Either way, standing knee-deep in itchy fabric, you realize that colour is less important than whether the thing keeps catching wind. By midday, the sun is hot overhead, and the smell of pitch sweat and wool blends into a perfume only a sailor could tolerate. The warriors grumble, but there's an odd cheerfulness to it. They sing work songs loud off-key and slightly rude. One is about a goat that stole beer from a monk. Another compares the ship to a jealous wife. You laugh despite yourself because somehow the absurdity makes the work lighter. Then comes polishing weapons. The crew gathers in a circle, each man laying out swords, axes, and spears. You're given a whetstone and shown how to draw it along the blade in smooth, careful strokes. Sparks fly. The sound is steady, hypnotic, like a cat sharpening claws. It feels oddly soothing. You might actually enjoy this part if your hands weren't already raw from tar and thread. While you scrape, one warrior brags about how his axe once split a shield clean in half. Another interrupts, claiming that his sword has tasted the blood of 5 men in one battle. They argue heatedly, comparing scars as evidence. Finally, an older Viking mutters, "Historians will never believe half of what we say," and everyone laughs. You silently agree future scholars are in for a headache. After weapons, it's armor chainmail shirts dragged from wooden chests, dented helmets hammered back into shape. You try lifting a mail shirt and nearly dislocate your shoulder. No wonder they spend so much time building muscle. One of the crew demonstrates how to oil the metal to keep rust away. You nearly spill the oil but recover, earning a rare nod of approval. By evening, the longship gleams like new. The hull is tarred, the ropes coiled neatly, the sail patched, the weapons sharpened, and the crew exhausted but satisfied. There's a sense of pride in the air, as though the ship itself is alive and grateful. Quitting time doesn't mean relaxation, though. The chieftain inspects the work, pacing slowly, nodding at each improvement. When he reaches you, he points at a streak of pitch across your cheek. "Good," he says, simply, and that one word feels like a medal. Dinner that night tastes better than usual, simple fish stew, bread and ale, but your arms ache so badly you can barely lift the spoon. Around the fire, the warriors tease one another about who spilled pitch, who stabbed their finger sewing, who sharpened a sword backward. Even the chieftain chuckles. You settle back sore but strangely proud. For the first time you've contributed not just as a tag-along, but as part of the crew. The longship isn't just wood and sail, it's survival, it's pride, it's home. And tonight, under a canopy of stars, you feel the faint stirrings of belonging to it. Sleep is never truly deep on a Viking voyage, and when dawn drags you awake again, you realize today is not about ship repairs, but about training. Your arms are still sore from hauling ropes and tar, and now they want you to swing weapons. Welcome to the Viking gym, where there are no memberships, just bruises. The sandy clearing near the ship becomes your arena. Warriors line up, some with shields, others with axes or spears, all grinning like they've been waiting to test the newcomer. You're handed a wooden sword. It's heavy enough to feel dangerous, but safe enough not to split your skull outright, at least that's the theory. The Viking opposite you gives a toothy grin. He has arms the size of tree trunks. You're doomed. Mainstream fact: Vikings practiced with wooden weapons during downtime. These sparring sessions weren't just games, they built stamina and skill while preventing fatal accidents in training. Think of it as medieval CrossFit minus the Instagram posts. The bout begins with a roar. You swing clumsily, the wooden blade whistling through the air. He parries easily, taps your shoulder with his shield edge, and sends you stumbling. The crew laughs, but it's good-natured. You get back up, cheeks flushed, and swing again. This time, you land a lucky tap to his ribs. He nods. Small victory. After sparring, you're herded toward the shield wall drill. The warriors line up, each gripping a round shield rim to rim. You're shoved into the formation, and before you know it, they're charging. The wall surges forward like a single beast. You stumble trying to keep in step, your legs pumping hard. Behind the shields they roar in unison, voices thundering. It's terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Quirky tidbit: archaeologists have found evidence that some Viking shields were painted with bright, even whimsical designs. Spirals, animals, sometimes strange faces meant to intimidate. Imagine facing down a wall of snarling cartoon bears and dragons while they scream battle cries. No wonder enemies panicked. After drills, the warriors break into smaller groups for specialty training. Archers set up straw targets and loose arrows with a deadly thunk, thunk, thunk. Others practice throwing spears at logs driven into the sand. You're handed a spear, shown how to balance it, then told to throw. Your first attempt goes wildly off, sailing into the dunes. Laughter erupts. You mutter that baseball wasn't invented yet, but you clearly wouldn't make the team anyway. The chieftain himself demonstrates axe throwing, casually hurling his weapon at a log and splitting it in two. He doesn't miss once. When it's your turn, your axe wobbles mid-air and falls flat. He smirks and says, "Good for chopping onions." You consider taking that as a compliment. Historians still argue whether every Viking warrior was truly a trained fighter, or if only a core group specialized while the rest were more like farmers with weapons. Some say every man trained daily, others believe only elites or raiding parties honed such skills. Judging by the sweat dripping down your back, you suspect it was somewhere in between. Everyone had to be ready, but only a few were truly terrifying. The physicality of it is staggering. Wooden swords crash against shields with echoing cracks. Spears whistle through the air. Arrows hum past. Sweat stings your eyes and your lungs burn. Yet there's a rhythm to it, almost like a dance, an ugly, bruising, exhausting dance. And through it all, the Vikings grin and shout encouragement. They seem less interested in winning and more in making sure you don't quit. By midday, training shifts from weapons to conditioning. You're told to run along the beach carrying a shield and wearing a helmet. The sand drags at your feet each step like trudging through syrup. Meanwhile, your Viking companions jog effortlessly, singing ribald songs about ale and goats. You wheeze, trying to keep pace. One of them claps you on the back so hard you nearly fall face first into the surf. Later comes wrestling, because apparently you haven't suffered enough. Two burly men grapple in the sand, flipping each other with surprising speed. Wrestling was a favorite Viking pastime, both as training and as entertainment. Your opponent is grinning before you even start. He lunges, grabs your arm, and suddenly you're face down in the sand. Cheers erupt. He helps you up, pats you on the shoulder, and says, "Good fall." Apparently that's praise. Quirky reward after training. Everyone plunges into the icy sea. You follow reluctantly, the cold water stabbing like needles. But oddly, it feels invigorating, washing away the sweat and soreness. You emerge shivering but awake, hair-plastered teeth chattering. One Viking shouts better than a monk's bath, which sets everyone laughing again. By evening, the fire crackles and food tastes doubly good. You sip ale with blistered hands and aching limbs. The warriors swap tales of past raids battles and occasionally embarrassing training accidents. One admits he once knocked himself out with his own shield. You feel slightly better about your own clumsy performance. As you drift towards sleep, sore muscles humming, you realize that today wasn't about becoming a warrior overnight. It was about sharing the grind, the sweat, the bruises. And though you'll never swing a sword like them, you've earned a sliver of respect, the only way they value by enduring. Morning fog hangs heavy over the water, and when the chieftain calls for the ship to be readied, you feel both dread and excitement. Today it seems you're setting sail not just for another coastline raid, but for an actual journey inland. The orders come quick. Everyone hustles to load supplies, coil ropes, and check weapons. You're shoved a bag of dried fish and told, "Don't drop it or you'll swim." Comforting. The longship glides up river oars, dipping in smooth unison. You sit between two broad-shouldered men who row like machines, their strokes steady and endless. You try to match them, your arms straining, but quickly fall behind. The man to your right chuckles and says, "Keep going, you'll row your way to Valhalla." You're not sure that's the motivational speech you needed. Mainstream historical fact. Viking longships were incredibly shallow in draft, allowing them to sail not only across seas, but deep into rivers. This meant no place was truly safe, not monasteries, not villages tucked far inland. The sleek design gave them terrifying reach, like the first amphibious assault vehicles of their day. The deeper you go upriver, the thicker the forest becomes. The air is damp and buzzing with insects. Every bend feels like an ambush waiting to happen. The chieftain orders silence, and even the normally rowdy crew quiets down. Shields rest within easy reach, and every eye scans the riverbanks. You grip your oar tighter, pretending you don't notice your heart pounding. Quirky tidbits, some sagas mention that Vikings believed river spirits could be bribed for safe passage. Offerings of coins or food were sometimes tossed into the water before setting sail. As you row, you notice one warrior discreetly flicking a piece of dried meat into the river. He mutters something under his breath. You're tempted to do the same, though with your luck, the river spirit probably prefers mead. Hours pass. The oarsmen rotate fresh arms, replacing tired ones. But you're not spared when your break comes. You're put to work, bailing out water with a wooden bucket. Apparently, leaks are just part of the Longship experience. You glance at the chieftain, who looks completely unconcerned. Of course he is. He's not the one with soggy boots. Suddenly shouts echo from the bank. Figures dart through the trees. The alarm spreads. Instantly, shields are raised and the crew braces. Arrows whistle, some splashing into the river, others thudding into shields. You drop flat, wishing you could melt into the planks. The chieftain bellows, row harder. The ship surges forward, oars churning water to froth. You keep your head down, gripping the oar so tight your knuckles ache. Historians still argue whether Vikings always sought battle or often preferred to avoid it when possible. Some believe they loved the clash, while others argue they were pragmatic traders and raiders using violence only when necessary. In your current situation, as arrows fly past your ear, you'd vote for avoid it. The ambush fades as quickly as it came. The ship pushes past the bend, and the river grows quiet again. One man pulls an arrow from his shield, twirls it, and tucks it into his belt like a souvenir. Another laughs and says, "They'll tell their grandchildren about missing us." The tension breaks with chuckles and slaps on the back. Meanwhile, you're still shaking, replaying the moment you almost became a human pincushion. By late afternoon, the river widens. The chieftain calls for beaching the ship. Warriors jump out, dragging the Longship up onto the sandy bank. Fires are built, meat roasted, and guards posted. You sit by the flames, trying to look like you belong. One man notices your pale face and says, "You did well. You didn't scream louder than the arrows." That apparently is high praise, quirky ritual. As the sun dips, one warrior produces a small carved idol from his pouch, a tiny figure of Thor, hammer in hand. He plants it in the ground by the fire and pours a splash of ale over it. The crew murmurs blessings, asking for safe passage tomorrow. Someone hands you the cup and you awkwardly mimic the gesture. The ale soaks into the earth. You're not sure if Thor heard, but at least no one laughed. The night deepens. From across the river you hear distant drums, maybe a village preparing defenses, maybe just farmers celebrating a harvest. Either way, it sends shivers down your spine. You wrap yourself in your cloak and stare at the glowing embers. There's a strange unity in the campfire's circle. Men who were shouting and swinging axes hours ago now share stories and jokes, their faces soft in the firelight. One recounts a raid gone wrong, ending with their leader accidentally falling into a pigsty. The laughter is contagious, and even you can't resist. For a moment it feels almost like family. Yet beneath the laughter lurks tension. Everyone knows tomorrow could bring another ambush, or worse, a fortified village. Sleep doesn't come easy. You lie awake, listening to the rustle of the forest and the soft lapping of the river, wondering what awaits beyond the next bend. The morning mist clings to your face like a damp cloth as you stumble awake to the sound of the chieftain's booming voice. There's no good morning in this camp, only orders barked and axes sharpened. You rub the stiffness out of your arms, still sore from rowing and bailing yesterday. Breakfast is a hunk of dry bread that tastes like wood, washed down with water that smells faintly of river mud. One man cheerfully calls it Viking coffee. You're not convinced. The Longship is dragged back into the water with grunts and curses, and you're shoved into your spot at the oars. Once again, the river becomes your endless treadmill. You fall into the rhythm muscles, burning blisters forming. The man beside you notices your grimace and smirks. First week's the worst. After that, you just stop feeling anything. Comforting advice. Mainstream historical fact. Viking raids often targeted monasteries and undefended settlements, chosen not just for their wealth, but for their lack of resistance. The monastery's libraries and golden reliquaries made them tempting prizes, though the monks themselves usually regretted the encounter. You row, trying not to think about what undefended means for the people inside. Hours pass and the sun climbs higher. The crew begins to hum. A rowing chant, voices low and rough, the rhythm strangely hypnotic. You find yourself joining in mumbling words you don't understand but somehow feel. The chant makes the oars bite the water in perfect unison, the ship slicing forward like a blade. Quirky tidbit sagas mention that some crews believed singing while rowing kept sea monsters at bay. Apparently nothing likes to snack on humans as much as bored ocean serpents. You catch one man tapping his shield with a rhythm like a drum. He winks at you. "Keep singing," he says, "unless you'd rather get swallowed whole." You sing louder. By midday the river narrows, dense forests loom close on both banks, branches hanging low like skeletal arms. The air is thick and buzzing with flies. The chieftain orders shields up just in case. Everyone sits taller, eyes darting. The mood shifts from joking to tense silence. You grip your oar, ready to duck. And then you hear it. Church bells, faint but clear, drifting over the water. The crew stiffens. Ahead, a monastery stands on a rise stone walls, weathered but proud. Smoke curls lazily from chimneys. You can almost hear the monks chanting inside, blissfully unaware of what's rowing toward them. The chieftain raises his arm. No words are needed. The oars pull harder, the longship speeding like a predator on the hunt. Your stomach knots. You're not sure you signed up for this part. You wonder what will happen if you refuse, but then you remember refusing a Viking chieftain usually comes with a permanent solution. Historians still argue whether all Vikings were raiders by choice or whether many were farmers dragged along by duty and survival. Some claim the image of Vikings as endless pillagers is exaggerated. Others insist it was their defining feature. Sitting here, feeling the tension on the longship, you lean toward the not exaggerated camp. The ship glides ashore below the monastery. Warriors leap out, shields slamming together, axes gleaming. You hesitate a heartbeat too long and someone shoves you forward. Your boots squelch in the mud. The chieftain bellows and the warriors surge uphill like a tidal wave. You stumble along behind, trying to look fierce while secretly wishing you could disappear. The clash is quick, brutal, and loud. Shouts, bells, splintering wood. You catch glimpses, monks scattering a door, smashed open, treasures lifted high. Your job apparently is not swinging an axe, but carrying what others hand you, chalices, books, even a carved cross. You stagger under the weight, realizing you're now officially part of this raid, whether you like it or not. Quirky moment, one warrior finds a jar of honey, dips his hand in and licks it clean like a child caught in the pantry. He grins, honey smeared across his beard, and shouts, "Best raid yet." Another stuffs a bundle of manuscripts into his cloak, muttering about selling them to a Frankish trader. You can't help but think somewhere centuries later, a historian is cursing this exact moment. The raid ends almost as suddenly as it began. Smoke curls from the broken roof and the crew hustles back to the ship arms full of loot. You follow, still dazed, clutching a gilded cup. As the longship pushes off, the chieftain laughs, raising his prize high. The warriors cheer, pounding shields with weapons. The noise is deafening. You slump against the oar bench, exhausted, guilty, and slightly sticky from the honey jar that got passed around. The river carries you away, leaving smoke on the horizon. That night, back on the bank, the crew feasts. Mead flows, meat roasts, and stories of the raid grow taller with each retelling. One man claims he fought off 10 monks single-handedly. Another says he saw a spirit rise from the church's altar. You just sit quietly staring into the fire, wondering how many more times you'll have to repeat this before you break. The stars wheel overhead, brilliant and cold. The laughter around you feels both comforting and alien. You realize you've crossed a line you can't uncross. You are no longer just a guest on this longship. You are part of its story now, whether you like it or not. The next morning you rise with the gulls' cries echoing across the inlet. The air smells of salt, damp wool and stale smoke. Your body aches from rowing and storm-tossing, but compared to yesterday's terror, it feels like paradise. The longship lies grounded on the sand like a sleeping beast, scarred but still intact. Men shuffle around it, repairing torn sailcloth, checking oars, mending rope. You're pressed into work immediately. No one is allowed to idle. A burly crewmate hands you a needle as long as your finger and shows you how to stitch a sail with heavy flax thread. Your stitches are clumsy, but he just shrugs. Better crooked than torn, he says, patting your back hard enough to knock the wind out of you. Mainstream historical fact. Viking sails were typically made from wool treated with animal fat or even fish oil to repel water. The smell, as you can imagine, wasn't exactly refreshing. As you pass the thick cloth under your nose, you gag and wonder if this is why seagulls circle so persistently they think the ship itself is a giant fish. Later, when the sail is patched, the crew gathers around for morning rations, dried fish, hard bread, and a thin ale to wash it down. It's barely edible, but hunger makes the best seasoning. Someone tosses you a piece of bread so stale you could probably use it as a weapon. You gnaw it anyway because you know there won't be seconds. A quirky tidbit surfaces in conversation. One man swears that to soften hard bread at sea, Vikings sometimes dunked it in ale or even held it in their mouths until it became chewable. He demonstrates proudly a lump of bread stuffed into his cheek like a squirrel. Another man calls him disgusting but promptly does the same. Soon half the crew is puffed up like drunken chipmunks laughing through full mouths. But laughter fades when the chieftain steps forward. His face, his serious eyes sharp as a hawk's. He announces the plan: the ship will sail further south where rumors whisper of fat, trading towns with weak defenses. Some men cheer, already dreaming of gold. Others grunt uneasily, glancing toward the horizon. You sit silently, wondering if you'll live long enough to see home, wherever that might be. Historians still argue whether Viking raids were primarily opportunistic, smash and grabs, or part of a deliberate expansion strategy. Listening to your chieftain, you can't tell either. To you, it feels less like strategy and more like hunger. Hunger for wealth, fame, and the stories men will tell around fires long after you're gone. The ship is dragged back into the water, patched and bristling with restless energy. Oars dip again, muscles straining. You fall into rhythm automatically now, the motion burned into your body. Hours blur into one long aching stroke. Sun climbs, wind fills the repaired sail, and the ship cuts across the water like an arrow loosed from a bow. By evening, land appears in the distance. Smoke curls faintly from chimneys, though it's hard to tell whether they belong to a village or just farmers' huts. The crew murmurs, sharpening weapons, adjusting armor. The air grows thick with tension. You realize this may be the moment. Another raid, another monastery, another storm of screaming and fire. The ship slides closer under cover of dusk, every man silent. You grip your oar tightly, palms raw, stomach twisting. The water laps softly against the hull, the world holding its breath. But then nothing. The chieftain studies the land, frowns, and signals for the ship to turn back. Maybe the settlement looked too strong, or maybe the gods whispered caution into his ear. Either way, the longship glides away, leaving the shore untouched. Relief floods your body so hard you almost laugh. Night settles again. The crew makes camp on another beach, smaller fires glowing faintly against the dark. Men sleep in heaps, weapons clutched in their arms. You lie on your back, staring at the stars, listening to the sea, breathing against the shore. For the first time you wonder what it would take to walk away, to slip into the woods at dawn, vanish into the countryside, and find your way back to your own life. But then you remember you don't even know which coast you're on. You'd be more lost on land than on this cursed ship. So you close your eyes, the creak of the Longship, the snoring of men, the hiss of waves, they've become a strange sort of lullaby. Maybe tomorrow will bring another raid, another storm, another brush with death. But tonight at least you are still alive, and that feels like treasure enough. The fires fade. The voices of the crew settle into silence, swallowed by the rhythm of waves brushing sand. Your body sinks deeper into the ground, every muscle loosening, every breath slower, heavier, calmer. The air is cool now, the salt gentler, the smoke from the campfires thinning until it seems to drift away with your thoughts. Above you, the stars stretch in endless clusters, scattered jewels across the black. You imagine them guiding sailors long before and long after you, their light steady when everything else feels uncertain. The Longship rests quietly nearby, no longer a beast of storm and fury, but a shadow stretched on the beach. Even the wood seems to sigh its creaks, softened, as though the ship itself has fallen asleep. Your mind drifts back to the monastery bells, to the storm's roar, to the endless oar strokes that carried you here. But each memory feels more distant now, softened at the edges like smoke fading into the night sky. The sharpness of fear blurs, leaving only calm. The sea's hush becomes a lullaby, the steady in and out of a great breath that holds you gently. The sand beneath you is firm, yet forgiving, grounding you as the world settles into quiet. You let your eyes close, letting go of the need to row, to fight, to flee. There is nothing left to do. Only the tide continues its patient rhythm and the stars their slow watch. You are safe in this moment, wrapped in darkness, carried by the calm. And as the fire's last ember fades, you drift deeper, weightless, into rest.